thank you. Good morning and welcome everyone to the Thursday, August 3rd meeting of the Santa Cruz Library's Facilities Financing Authority meeting. It's 9 a.m. and we are convening in the downtown branch library. So first order of business is a roll call.
Jenny Haruyama.
Here.
Jamie Goldstein.
Here.
Alternate Tina Schull for Martin Bernal.
Here.
Alternate Christina Maury for Carlos Palacios.
Here. Okay, thank you. And are there any additional materials beyond what's been provided in the packet?
No, I do not believe so.
No? Okay. And are there additions and deletions to the agenda?
No, I do not believe so.
Thank you. Okay, seeing none. Then we'll turn to oral communications. This is a time for any member of the public to address the board on any matter not on the agenda but within the jurisdiction. So would anyone like to address the board this morning? No one's jumping up. All right, thank you. So then we'll close oral communications. Item 5 is a report from the executive director.
I do not have a report at this time.
Okay, very quick. Item 6 then is turning to project updates and comments by board members. So going around the table, is there anyone who wishes to make any comments or updates? Nothing from the county? Capitola?
We're moving along with our library.
Excellent. Nope, no. And I'll just say in brief, and I think this will come up on the next meeting's agenda, just our library advisory committee has had 4 meetings, I think, so far, and that process is moving along for our downtown branch. Okay, so then item 7, this is the consent calendar. This is items A, B, and C that can be approved in a single motion. And I'll first see if any members of the public wishes to comment on any of the items on the consent agenda. No? Do any board members wish to pull any items?
I had a question about the budget, so maybe we can pull that.
Okay, so we'll pull the budget. Okay, so that's been a suggestion. So is there a motion to approve items 7A and 7B on the consent agenda?
I'll move to approve those items.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, that passes. So then we are turning to item 7C. This is the proposed fiscal year 17-18 LFFA budget, appearing on page 15 of the packet. And Jamie, you have questions?
Yeah, so I understand this is a relatively routine budget, and this question may be better directed to the county. I contacted Marcus last night. He told me he was a place to get the information. But what I was curious about was the interest line item in the budget, which shows we're showing about $4,000 for this fiscal year, and then I'm seeing around $4.5 million in there. And so the question just is, are we in LAIF? And at LAIF, I would think it'd be $40,000, and my assumption then is that the balance isn't $4.5 million. Or I'm wondering if I can get an answer to the question, and if I can't, then I'm more than happy to approve it, and we can answer that offline.
Yeah, Edith Driscoll, treasurer to the LFFA. So we're not in LAIF. Our money is, we're talking about our bond money, and our bond money, once we received it just this past month or 2, depending on what month we're in now, the money is sitting at Bank of New York and it's invested in, I have provided that information to you, your treasurer, just the other day. Right,
I'm sorry, I'm not asking about the bond proceeds, I'm asking about in this budget. I'm seeing a line item for assessments at $4.5 million.
Right.
And an interest at, what was it?
About 4,000. So basically, as soon as we received the sales tax money, we allocate it out to your entities. And there's often a few days float. So last year we earned $4,500 in interest, and so we were just more conservative still and just putting a budget for 4,000.
Got it. So the answer to the question is there's not $4.5 million for the LFFA sitting there all year long. It's coming in and going out.
Right, we turn over to you guys within a week or so.
Thank you.
Okay. So any other questions? Any comments from the public on this item? Seeing none. Right, is there a motion to approve the proposed fiscal year 17-18 budget for the LFFA?
I'll move approval.
Okay.
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All right, that carries. Okay, then we move on to general business, and I see none on the agenda if I'm looking at it correctly. Okay. So I will just note that scheduled upcoming meetings, the next meeting is on September 7th at the Scotts Valley Branch Library. And I think that's an evening meeting starting at 6 p.m. as well. Okay, so with that, we will adjourn the Santa Cruz Library's Facilities Financing Authority meeting of August 3rd. So now we move into the regular Joint Powers Authority Board meeting, and this immediately follows the LFFA meeting. So I will now call this to order. Note again, it's August 3rd, about 9:08 a.m., and we're at the Downtown Branch Library, and I'll ask for a roll call for this meeting.
Jenny Harurama,
Here.
Jamie Goldstein,
Here.
Tina Schull, alternate for Martin Bernal,
Here.
Christina Maury for Carlos Palacios.
There. Thank you. And are there any presentations this morning?
No.
No presentations? Additional materials?
No.
No? Any additions and deletions to the agenda?
No.
No? Okay. So now we'll move into oral communications for the Joint Powers Authority regular meeting. Again, any person in the audience may address the board on items that are within the purview but not on the agenda. So we'll ask anyone to step forward.
Okay, so, hello.
Good morning.
Could you step
Oh.
to the podium, please?
Okay. Hi, Judy Grunstra. Just want to say I appreciate the efforts to, let's say, improve the sidewalks in front of the main branch, because there are, I noticed a lot fewer, almost no people hanging around there, blocking access to the book drop and the sidewalk with tons of belongings. So that's a big improvement. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Would anyone else care to address the board this morning? Okay. Seeing none, that will close oral communications. And then we'll turn to item 6, Library Director's Report. And this can also be found on pages 4 and 5 in the packet. Good morning.
Good morning. There's one thing I would like to add. We were able to expand ours as a pilot program last month. We had parties in all of our branches, and we put together a small book of comments by the public. I'd love to share a few. Yay, library open on my day off. I'll be here. I'm an early bird and a Sunday library visitor who lives in Felton. I'm so happy. More inclusive for families, also for those of us who have to work late. Thank you. There are now 3 whole days a week I can visit the library after work. Thank you. And so I thought I would share some photographs and some comment cards by the public. And I just really want to thank the Joint Powers Board for their consistent work on the behalf of the library to get more hours.
Thank you. It's wonderful. I'll pass it around and have a look there. Okay, does that conclude your report?
That does.
All right. Thank you.
Can I ask a question on the written director's report?
Correct.
I see that we've joined this consortium of other libraries to share digital content. Is that through the Overdrive system, or is there another system to use to access that?
It's Biblioteca.
Okay, so
So
a different app?
It's a different app.
All right.
And I apologize, Library World has not yet consolidated their digital content. So I think from a user perspective, it's not terribly friendly, but what we're really trying to do is get as much access to content as possible. So what this consortium does, which I think is pretty innovative, is if our content is sitting there and nobody's in a queue for it, it makes it available to the other libraries in the consortium, and vice versa. So it really has, I'm a big user of the Biblioteca app, it really has provided a much broader array of materials for the public. So we love Overdrive, but you may want to download Biblioteca as well.
Good. We'll check it out.
We're also adding a lot of digital audio content, so if you like to listen in your car.
Any other questions from the forum? Thank you. And I see a member of the public wishes to make a comment.
Director's report?
It's the end of it, so because it's an agendized item, we'll take public comment on it. So if you'd like to step up here.
Thank you. Sometimes these things go past, so I'm not sure if I had a chance to.
Yeah, this is on item 6 still, the library director's.
Oh, okay. Well, on page 5 of the director's report, it mentions the subcommittee of the Downtown Library Advisory Committee, that they're working on a plan to get feedback from the public. And the RFQ addendum with Noel and Tam, it calls for 3 public meetings or additional meetings should they become necessary. So I know August 9th, this upcoming meeting of the DLAC was supposed to be the first public meeting as far as getting public input, but I realize, you know, there needs to be some flexibility in the work plan for sure. I don't think you should rush that, you know, and have to stick to a rigid work plan. But I'm really, you know, concerned that these public meetings will be well advertised and facilitated so that the public really gets a chance on several occasions to see what the plans are before they're set in stone, as it were. You know, okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. So if there's no other comment on this item, then we'll move on to item 7. This is a report by Friends of the Santa Cruz Public Libraries. We have written materials at pages 6 and 7. And report, good morning.
Good morning, everybody. Basically, just quickly, the most recent gift, I think, is in our report, is the La Selva group, the Selva Beach group, funded this academic year's homework help for that branch. But mainly what we've been focusing on are programs for National Read a Book Day, which is, the actual day is September 6th. And we started with the Festival of the Book. We gave away 300 books to children, and they also bought a lot more books at that store. I can't remember how much we made off of that, but 300 books were given away free. Then the Aptos chapter, the Friends, put together books for every student at the Mar Vista School. We also funded several author visits during the summer, and that included Lori King downtown, and I probably am going to pronounce her last name wrong, but it's Joyce Aros at Scotts Valley, and those 2 chapters got involved. We are moving forward. We're now working with the Housing Authority and the library to help set up little libraries at some of the low-income housing units, and that's going to start in the fall. And the National Read a Book Day is going to culminate with the 4th edition of our gala, and I have invites for everyone on the board here. So,
Pass this on to Martine. Thank you. Wonderful.
and then the one final thing that the board is working on, we want to be, all our chapters and our main board want to be incredibly unified when we go into any buildings to help. So we are working to find a communications person or a group to help us get a unified vision as we move forward with the building campaign. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
I just want to add one thing. We did a lot of sort of user experience discussions after the strategic plan last fall, and one thing that became clear is that people wanted drive-up book drops, which are hard to do in the environments that we have, but the Friends are helping us by paying for an external drive-up book drop at the Aptos library, which we've just installed, and we're sort of testing out to see if this works and if it's what our customers really want. We'll try to figure out ways to add them in other places, but I'm really excited about that sort of project because it lets us experiment with a concept that the public expressed they wanted.
Thank you. And I see that we have a member of the public who wishes to speak. You can come on up. We'll take public comment on this item as well.
It's a question. I know the Friends just had a board meeting. Is that true?
So the public comment time is time to address the board on the item, and so we listen to your comment, and if there are follow-up questions, we can do that after.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I just wondered if the Friends board meetings, if there were minutes taken, and if those minutes were available as a member of Friend. So I'm interested in what went on at the meeting.
Right.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Okay. So is there any other public comment on this item? No? All right, and then, so item 8, we have a report by the Library Advisory Commission. Commissioner's report.
Martha's here.
Hello, I'm Martha Dexter, Chairman of the Library Advisory Commission.
And we did not meet in July. However, our last meeting was Monday, June 19th. At that meeting, we continued our process of supporting the library's strategic plan and learning more about activities that are underway as part of the plan. In June, we heard about the local history support projects that the library engages in. From staff told us about their projects, and then the Genealogical Society of Santa Cruz County made a presentation as well. So in August, we will meet on Monday, August 21st. At that meeting, we're going to get an update on the Measure S projects that are underway. And I would say almost all of the members on the commission are active in some form or another with the specific projects that are going on in the jurisdictions. So it'll be a good opportunity for us to hear everything that's going on across. And we'll also consider our meeting schedule for the rest of this year and into next year. So that's it from us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, this is an agendized item. Does a member of the public wish to speak on this? Okay, seeing none. Okay, thank you again for that update, Martha. And then item 9, comments from board members. This is our time to provide any comments we would like. Is there anything anyone would like to share? Seeing no's. Okay, so we will move right along. Thank you. Okay, so item 10 is the consent calendar, and on this we adopt all these items by one motion, and they appear to be items A through J. First of all, I'll ask if any member of the board wishes to pull any items. I'll ask if any member of the public wishes to comment or pull any of the items in the consent agenda. Seeing none, okay, well then, is there a motion to approve items 10A through J on the consent calendar?
So moved.
So moved. Is there a second? Okay, we have a motion and a second to adopt the consent calendar in its entirety. All those approved, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None, so that carries unanimously. So then we move on to general business, and the first matter is item 11A, the gifts policy, and this is found at pages 94 and 101 of the packet. And Susan, I presume you want to give an overview?
And I would just say, I think this is the third time we've seen the gift policy. It's gone through a lot of changes. And we tried to, I think the last time we talked, we wanted to make sure that the gifts policy was coordinated with the naming policy. So you'll see those changes, that you can see that the naming policy becomes a subset of the gift policy. We did lower the amount that needs to be approved by the Joint Powers Board to $25,000. And then we do sort of a clarification about the Friends' role in accepting gifts and expectations.
Thank you. Any questions from the board?
I had one, I guess, more of a clarification question. On page 96, it talks about how your gifts will be received by the Friends. I'm assuming that's the Friends of the Santa Cruz Public Library group. So is that for all gifts and donations, and then if they want to earmark that for, like, say, Scotts Valley, they note that?
Correct, and we're truly trying to encourage fewer earmarks. I think the places we would still honor earmarks are by branch and for the collection, but I think we're gonna try very hard to encourage people to give us sort of broader gifts. I love the story. I worked at the University of Minnesota where someone had given a scholarship to white men of Norwegian descent that didn't smoke, and it's interesting as time, you know, we have a gift, for example, for magazines, and the magazine industry is really fundamentally changing. So we are going to try to work with our donors to do higher level gifts, but we'll still honor by branch, and especially things focused on collections.
And is the process now where people are making donations directly to the branch?
Our recommendation, they can give it directly to the branch, but our recommendation now is, and our policy now is to recommend that they give it to the Friends, 501c3, rather than to the library itself. This does allow them to still give it to the library if they feel strongly, but what we're trying to do is create a strong friends group that has the database, the processes, all of those things.
And has this, I guess, process been vetted through all of the individual friend branches group, and do they have feedback, and how will that be conveyed to them?
It went through the Friends Board, so not each individual branch, but there are representatives from each branch on that board.
Okay, and then will there be some type of outreach to the individual branches to make sure that everybody kind of is on board?
We can do that. I think the practice, because the main Friends group is the 501c3, things have been flowing through.
Okay, that's great.
But it's to codify that. I would still say there is the opportunity for donors to give directly to the city itself.
So, first off, thank you, board, for approving our naming rights list on the consent earlier. And this question is related to that. And I'm just trying to figure out this interplay between the City of Capitola's naming policy, now our naming policy that this board has adopted, and then this policy. So it says gifts valued at over $25,000 will be approved by the Joint Powers Board. And then we talk about that if the condition is naming, please see the naming policy. Resources garnered from the naming are gifts and are subject to this policy. So I guess what I'm trying to get my head around is,
We spent a lot of time with this, and I just have to say, there's an interplay between the gift policy, the naming policy, the MOU we want to develop with the Friends, and strangely enough, the leases, okay?
sure. Yeah.
And he may have pointed out a flaw. What we're trying to do is achieve a place where naming is just considered from our perspective, a conditional gift. And the condition is that you named this object, right? So that, you're right, I mean, I think you're right.
So here's my concern, is that we just approved a policy that lists out what in Capitola we're gonna,
And the jurisdiction then approves the naming.
right. And
So
then
do you have to bring it back here?
Yeah, because it sounds like I feel like we just approved 14 naming opportunities at the Capitola branch. We've approved the naming policy for the regional board, and we say we're gonna be consistent with that policy. It also says that jurisdictions have to approve individual namers in our policy. There's so many policies, and forgive me.
So
But this seems to point back and says a $25,000 donation for naming consistent with all of those things. We have to come back to this board.
I think we have two options. One is just to have not this board doesn't accept gifts. I think the other one is we could say anything over $25,000 you have to accept other than gifts under the naming policy.
I think that would be my preference, because I feel like we've covered the naming policy pretty robustly already.
Yes.
And between, there's sort of multiple checkpoints. We have the JPA naming policy, now we have the local jurisdictions naming list, which comes back to the JPA for final sign-off. And then under the JPA naming policy, the local jurisdiction has to approve specific.
So I'm comfortable if you make that amendment and we allow Amy, our policy expert, to finesse the language towards the intent that you're achieving.
It almost seems like it says if the condition is naming, please see the library naming policy, period, and the remainder of that sentence, which is on page 2, top of page 2 of the policy, goes away. If the condition is naming, please see the naming policy.
I think we can achieve that intent if you give us some time to wordsmith it. So you're making that formal amendment?
Well,
I'm comfortable with that.
I'm pitching it.
I would actually say I think that provides clarity, so I would support that.
Can you clarify that, what the amendment is that you're trying to make and where
Well,
in the policy?
So So.
Can I take a stab?
Yeah, well, let me just do a little bit of background. So by background, this board has adopted a naming policy. And the naming policy lays out the parameters by which local jurisdictions basically can accept money in exchange for naming rights. And then kind of what the library's obligation is under that. So in that, it says local jurisdictions are going to develop a list and it's going to be approved by this board. And then it says local jurisdictions need to approve each donation associated with the naming. So the language on the top of page 2 here includes a second, I was actually thinking that the second sentence there.
So we're subject to this policy unless, you could say unless.
Well, so my first suggestion was to leave that piece of the sentence that says if gifts are subject to naming, please see the naming policy. But it may be that that's not wise because there may be pieces of this that actually should apply there. So maybe, and that may be, like our director suggested, more a matter of finessing it.
And if you look at the first page under the second paragraph, it says gifts valued at over $25,000 will be approved by the Joint Powers Board. And what I think we're trying to do is stay away from these sort of double approvals. So you may, I think our intention is that the naming policy really goes through the local jurisdictions, but the JPA is made aware of it. And what we don't want to do is bring things from the local jurisdiction then back under the $25,000.
Sure, I mean, just the awkwardness of accepting a donation and then it gets to this board and, you know,
and so
carrying on some individual.
My suggestion most likely is to say gifts valued at over $25,000 will be approved by the Joint Powers Board, except for gifts that come in under the naming policy.
Yeah.
And we'll say that in a much more eloquent way, but Amy's the person that's good at that.
That gets me one.
And maybe there's just a reporting piece to that. So I'm not aware if there's something someplace else in the policy, but maybe instead of having it come to the board for approval, it just comes to the board as a report, so we know what's going on in the other jurisdictions.
I can add that as well.
It's possible it's the naming policy.
Yeah.
So the amendment would include the exception of the naming policy for the $25,000 and a reporting function. Thank you for catching that, Jean.
Okay, I had one comment when I was reading through this, and I know there's been a long history. If you look at the first paragraph in the policy, let me see what sentence is this? 1, 2, 3, the third sentence, which reads, gifts are the delegated management responsibility of the director of libraries who will make decisions regarding gift acceptance and disposition. And then the next paragraph down, we talk about there's actually that approval over $25,000. So for me, that didn't wholly harmonize because unless I'm missing something, and I'd love to help understand if they're contrary or if it isn't, and I'm missing it.
I think they are contrary, so that is where you could take out, I think they're delegated to $25,000 is basically what this is saying.
And maybe as the policy was working through that, we can just harmonize that. Okay. Okay. It's a lot you're trying to combine across all these different, the leases, and a lot of things are still under development, so you're walking a fine line, so thank you. It is great to see these things come to life and try to be very clear and have expectations on paper.
I had another question on gifts of work for art for public display. So on this one, is this just speaking to any type of public art that is inside the library?
Correct.
Okay, and so then it's, with respect to, it's silent on external, so I'm assuming that external would be clearly working through the city's process?
So I think this gets into the lease discussion. What I'm proposing currently, as we get into the lease discussion, is that the insides become the JPA's jurisdiction and the outside become the city's. But I would like clarity and consistency.
Makes sense to me. I just wanted to make sure because you have a process sheet on page 99, and so you may want to, if we all kind of get to an agreement, you may want to specify that this is internal.
questions from the board on the draft gifts policy? I'm not seeing any, so now we'll open it up for public comment on this item. Would any member of the public wish to comment on the gifts policy? Not seeing any, so we'll close that. And so Jamie's about to form a motion, it looks like.
I am, and I was just going to note that our naming policy, the naming policy includes that the naming rights contract shall be reviewed and approved by the appropriate JPA jurisdictions and reported to the JPAB. So
that's covered.
That report is covered in the.
Okay, great. So we don't confuse it here.
Yeah.
Jamie, where was that? Just so I can note it.
I'm sorry. So I went back to our naming rights policy.
Oh, okay.
So,
Never mind.
okay, so the naming rights policy.
Which is in the packet. So
Yeah.
where are you looking exactly? Page 100?
Page 100.
100.
Page 2.
Under
naming
4. So the naming
So page
process.
101.
Page 101.
Okay, so my motion would be to approve the gift policy as presented with the changes to clarify the relationship between the gift policy and the naming policy. Is that clear enough?
Yes.
Rest of the board clear about what we're doing then? So we're making the one change to say that the $25,000 naming gifts don't have to go through a double two-step process.
And just generally, we'll just harmonize
The two pieces.
the policy through.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, we have a motion. Is there a second?
I will second.
Okay, motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? That's opposed. Thank you. All right, and so the motion carries. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. Okay.
Name box, there it is.
Okay, so now we're moving on to item 11B, jurisdiction leases, and the written information on this can be found at page 102 through 105. And Susan or Amy, are you giving an update on this?
I would be happy to talk about this. I think this is the beginning of a very long conversation, but I think it's a conversation we need to have in order to avoid problems in the future. The library, operations report to the Joint Powers Board, but the buildings are owned by the individual jurisdictions, and how that relationship plays out at times I think is confusing. And my hope is that we could create a consistent lease across all 4 jurisdictions that would outline that relationship, so that in the future, as we process new issues and questions, we have a framework to have that discussion. On the first page, you see that there's a series of sort of questions that I would love to get to the bottom of. But I think one way to start is really to have this discussion about a lease agreement, and maybe just from, I did have 3 people do a subcommittee. I'm sorry, no representatives were there from Scotts Valley. It was the 3 people that had volunteered at, I think it was the last meeting, to begin to sort of frame out what are the major issues that would have to be dealt with a lease. We put them together in just sort of a list so that we could have the conceptual discussions. I realize that at some point we're going to have to get attorneys involved and all of that, but I think we really want to start out with sort of basic terms of a lease. So my first question is, what would be the life of a lease? And it could be things like the life of the bonds, it could be the life of the building, it could be 5 years, 10 years, and then we need to have a way in which to renew leases. There are some copies of relationship sort of leases between the library and, for example, Scotts Valley, and I think Live Oak, but both of those leases have expired, and so we really don't want to get into a situation where we have unexpired leases because it creates a lot of ambiguity. So I'm curious about what you would see as the life of that lease. Do you have any feelings about that?
I'll jump in a little bit. I mean, you can see logic in a lot of different approaches, which is why you're presenting different options. And I was a part of that original subcommittee, so I had an advanced look at this a little bit. And I am wondering, I don't know this, but are there any legal duties for us that might be associated with the bond issue. And I don't know about that. I don't know if that's a consideration we'd want to have before we made any decisions, perhaps, perhaps not. Or is it just an administrative matter how we choose to organize it?
I'll take a stab at that, because I know that that was actually a subject of a lot of discussion. So the intent, whether or not it was accomplished, but the intent when we did the bond issuance was such that the library buildings could be operated by a public nonprofit library provider. And it wasn't specific to this JPA. I think that was actually a county issue, forgive me. But the county was really wanted to make sure that they could operate in the future some other model in those buildings that have been built with the bond proceeds. So that was the intent. Whether or not that was accomplished in the final bond documents and everything else, I can't attest to.
So Jeannie, if one of the jurisdictions decided in 5 years they don't want to operate a library in the building?
No.
I'm just asking
Oh, yeah.
this question. Do we have to honor the library aspect of the bond issue?
Yes.
And for how long? Through the life of the bonds?
So I believe it's like with bonds, and maybe longer. Edith may have information on that.
I don't have
Yeah.
any legal.
Yeah, but no, it's specifically, the bond issue is for public library improvements. I strongly remember that phrase, making it in there, operated by a public library operator, something along those lines. And so, no, Capitola couldn't convert the building into a new police station and others. Not consistent with the bond issuance, as I understand it.
So based on that, it does feel like these leases should last for the life of the bonds.
I think the leases should last for the life of the JPA.
Yeah, I heard the opposite.
Okay.
Because we choose to organize in this way, but it could be in 2025, we choose not to organize in this way. But
Right.
yet we'd have to honor the use of each facility as a library, but who operates it and how it's operated could be different.
Yeah.
So it does seem like it does run kind of with, because this lease is out of the agreements between jurisdictions and the current entity. And if the entity changes or morphs, then it seems like it should run with that term.
Is everyone comfortable with that?
I think that's the, yeah.
That's the thing that makes most
So,
sense to me.
so I will note that in my contract with the county, my contract with the city of Capitola has a contract to build a library with the county. In it, it says the term of the lease shall be a term of 99 years or such shorter period to which the parties may hereafter to agree in writing. So we have that as sort of a side agreement outside of the other two parties to this JPA. And so if we were to end up with a shorter term, we would have to have a discussion.
There'd still be obligations.
Yeah, well, we would just have to agree that it's only going to be a 5-year lease instead of 99 years, if that was, or there's a side agreement, I don't know. But that is a little quirk.
And then, do we want an ability to renew automatically?
I think that
Isn't that
I'm very
what
cognizant of being the only man up here, and suddenly, no.
Welcome to library world.
Exactly, and here I am,
In the room.
stereotypically in the room, speaking up too much.
Oh my. Noticed
Well,
that.
I would imagine that there'd have to be discussion about the JPA too. I don't really know the mechanism to trigger those negotiations or conversation around the cities and the county, but it seems like that might go hand in hand. So I don't know if it's automatic, but it's,
Yeah,
I mean, we need the ability to renew. Whether or not it's automatic, I don't know if we need.
Yeah, I would say we'd have to look at I'm not as familiar because Nicole worked on the JPA model, but looking at the terms and conditions in the JPA and how that's renewed, we might want to coincide that with the lease if we're going to follow the life of the
And
lease via the JPA.
so we'll put the ability in and we can take it out and it doesn't have to be automatic. The JPA is very specific about withdrawal terms. And so my suggestion is rather than trying to write anything else, we refer to the JPA's withdrawal terms as the guiding principles.
I think that's a good idea, because I think often if we have a shorter lease expiration date and it doesn't automatically roll forward, suddenly we discover that we've been out of lease contract for 6 months and the liability insurance has lapsed and everything. So something that maybe automatically continues it subject to the withdrawal terms in the JPA or something.
And I would like to reference it that way, so it creates, it requires unanimity to change the JPA. So no one can just go and do it, but rather than specify what is exactly said, I'd rather just refer to see the JPA for these terms, so that if the JPA chooses to change the withdrawal terms over the next 25 years, they can.
Yeah, I would say I would just defer to council on that, whether that's something you need to have spelled out in the lease or not.
Rent being $1 annually payable on the first day of the year. This is an interesting one. I think we're going to have to spend a lot of time talking about building access controlled by the library. What I'm looking for is a more traditional tenant-landlord relationship on access. It's not that the owners wouldn't have access to the building, but the owners would have limited access to the building and conditions about when and where they access the building. And I know that that's going to be a really big discussion in Capitola, and I know it's an issue at Scotts Valley. What I think we don't have in Scotts Valley is necessarily key control. And as a tenant in the building trying to preserve assets, that makes me nervous. And so my goal is trying to achieve sort of security of asset control. And I think that there's going to have to be some discussions about how we do that. And you'll see, Jamie, later on in this is a discussion of after-hours use and what that means. I just want to come to some common understanding about these things.
So I think there's going to be some expectation in Capitola about the availability of the community room.
Okay.
And it's probably very similar to the expectation of Scotts Valley. Whether the expectation is what we're able to deliver, I don't know.
And so we can go down to that particular piece. I think, again, then we need to have sort of policy statements about what is appropriate at access after hours, like, can the cities approve a party with alcohol in the library without the library's approval? How do we secure the collection and the technology in a way that protects the asset? Whose liability is it if something bad happens during that? And all I want is rules. I get that a lot of why we're trying to create these collaborative workspaces is so that we can use the building differently. But I think we just need clarity on how this works. The hard part about this is what works in one community might not exactly work in another. So,
or different facilities, how they're designed, right?
Yeah.
And so is there flexibility in this approach to address that? Where you have almost, 90% is uniform and then you have a couple of them that are specific?
we might have to, and I do agree that the way we're creating facilities, so for example, Capitola has really spent time and money to create a way to close off the library. And that is true in Scotts Valley, not true in some of our other facilities. So I do think there might have to be some modifications, but I think deviation from the norm needs to be for good reason.
So I think that the notion of having the library control the library somewhat counter to what I said earlier. It's probably right. The expectation about availability from the community doesn't necessarily have to be city controlled. It can be library controlled, but maybe in the after hours use section of each lease, there's some specific language that you can agree to. In Capitola, the library shall be available for the following types of groups subject to the library's reservation policies.
And I think there is precedent for this in terms of parks. There's a lot of use that goes on in different facilities. But then I want to have rules, guidelines, consistency. So if there's alcohol, you have to have an alcohol permit, and maybe you have to have security. If there's after-hours use, how do we do cleaning? Because we don't necessarily, there's a consequence to the facility, and we need to understand that impact on the library budget. And I think the liability issues get more complicated. I also say that I'm struggling with this operationally too, because as I look at the new models for libraries, there is a lot more night and weekend activity going on in libraries, much in the way that Ma is doing things. So we have one group that is a public instructional activity that's going on in the Aptos Library after hours with a volunteer managing it, but we did have an incident. So I hate to stop all of those activities because we had an incident, but we need to have a conversation about then what is the risk and liabilities, and yeah, you understand, right?
Yeah, I think what you're saying is very similar and no different in when a city goes through like a special events permit process. All of those things need to be checked off. We just need to figure out how to do it collectively.
How do you feel about that, Jean? You look distressed.
Well, I'm just realizing how difficult it's going to be. You know, in Capitola, so we have a community room that we make available to the public, and it's free, it's in City Hall, it's pretty flexible. The language basically says any community group, and we effectively, the only people that really discourage from using it is, you know, if it's for profit, the answer is no, or if it's a political campaign, I always counsel them about the appearance.
Right.
And then we have our community center, and there's more specific terms about the cost and the rental, and we offset the costs associated with the janitorial services and those sorts of things. So it's doable.
It's just not as simple as it appears.
Oh, for sure. And then the alcohol issue is big.
And I would say the library also does events with alcohol, so it's not that we're saying that there's never a time and place for that. I just think it needs structure.
Yeah.
What about fees? Do you charge when this room is used for a community group? You do?
To be honest, I come from a culture where there's a lot of paid meeting rooms in Minnesota, and so the libraries really went for the nonprofit community use, learning, focusing on sort of learning activities that are focused on public consumption. So, and we do have a lot of rules, like we don't want people to charge. If you're using a meeting room, you can't charge at the door. So I think we need to have a long discussion about this. I also think this model of community engagement is really fundamentally changing, and a lot of our old rules aren't going to work. So I'm as committed to being flexible and innovative on this concept as you, I think, are in terms of wanting to have some flexibility, but I think we still have to do that within a framework because it can get really out of control.
Oh, for sure. I mean, if we allow alcohol and, somebody decides they want to throw a big party there and they get the space for free and our community rooms designed to accommodate 100 people, I mean,
And we're going to have brand new, lovely facilities. I did go through a stage where we tried to do you can rent it after hours for parties. And honestly, the public libraries are slammed in terms of use. And so just even a chair like this that in a normal office setting would last 20 years, lasts about 5. So if you add quinceañeras and weddings on top of that, the facility just really takes a beating. And because we don't have sort of that replacement fund, I think we've got to keep that in mind as well. And I think we've got to focus on sort of that educational community building, as I'd love to think about the consistency with library mission, which is a lot of things. It's Boy Scout troops and art clubs and book clubs and civic groups. There's a lot that it can encompass, but I'd like to see us focus and specialize at that.
And right now, nothing is supervised. or is it?
So we had a big event through the Friends on the 4th of July. And in that case, for the first time, we paid a staff person to be there. It wasn't a high-level staff person. And we asked for payment on janitorial and there was alcohol involved in the event. So it can be done.
From the group.
From the group.
Because like a facilities attendant or something needs to be present depending on what the
event.
situation.
Okay, let's keep going because I have the feeling that one's going to be a long. This is actually more controversial than you may expect. When I say the library in this context, what I'm meaning is the library under the auspices of the JPA. So I would say that the library collection, trade fixtures, furniture, equipment is owned by the JPA and the library. So what I'm trying to get at is the interior contents are owned by the library and the building is owned by the jurisdiction. And why I'm going this direction is really from a budgetary standpoint, the library has to maintain those things. I know that your building projects are paying for interior contents. And so what I'm asking of you may be considered a reach. I'll give you an example of our original lease with Scotts Valley said that the contents aren't owned by the library. So then who maintains the contents? We have a large gift that was given by the Friends that under the lease said is owned by the city. It is the wall, the media wall, thank you. It's starting to go. Media doesn't last that long. So am I supposed to call the city and say, replace the media wall? And these, I think, are fundamental questions that you, in the long run, want to give the contents. And this, where this also starts to play out is with Friends gifts, because I think we need to have a discussion where if the Friends give the contents, it goes to the library and the JPA. If the Friends want to modify the building in any way, the Friends have done a lot of modifications to the buildings in Scotts Valley. They've done the porch, they've done lighting. Those things, I think, become permanent aspects of the building, and the jurisdiction owns them, but then the jurisdiction should also approve any of those modifications because it's a long-term change to the building. How do you feel about that?
I think that's appropriate.
Jamie, I'm putting you on the spot because you are already facing these decisions.
Right.
And what is interesting is you're seeing how they're playing out as you build the building, and the county and and you've seen them how they've played out in the past. But I don't think the county and the city have yet faced some of the subtleties implied in this. So.
We're putting a lot of effort into thinking about the interior signage during our architectural process, and our overall project budget includes probably a 5 or 6 figure pay that the city is paying for interior signage. So to say it's all yours is probably the right answer, and everything inside the box is yours. Maybe there's some language that says that when elements are components of the original design, if they're changed prior to some period, there's some review. I don't know, I'm just trying to think about this because, like you said, we're kind of in the hot seat. We're making these decisions right now and thinking a lot about the interior fixtures and the signage and the artwork.
So you're saying fixtures, so do you distinguish between things that when you are altering the building, like adding lighting, putting these are signs like bolted into the walls, or they bolted in?
In some cases, they're
just
like integrated into the wall.
Right, and so I think that then becomes a part of the
It's
building.
like an
It would be
architectural
part
feature.
of your control. I think movable things inside would be the libraries, like, so, but that would include works of art. Ostensibly, if you could pick up a painting and move it from wall to wall, as opposed to a sculpture that's integrated into the wall, which
But for
I think
example,
would be
so
part of
like,
the-
I think the teen room or the children's room sign is like wrapped around this corner, like integrated into
Yeah.
the wall. That said, the entire building is being designed with sort of this flexible floor plan, so that in theory, things could move around.
Well, and so I think the frustration is, if you own the sign, then does that mean I can never take it down?
Right.
And does that mean you get to decide what to name, what to put on the teen room wall as the sign? Whether it's an info desk or a reference desk, you know? And honestly, I really feel like things are going super well between the library and Capitola. And we've got a really active community group. And I just want to say that the library has every incentive to make the community as happy as possible. But I'll give you an example in Capitola that could have gotten sticky, is the community really wants the artwork from the cafe hung in the library, and there's a lot of pieces. And my concern had been, if we hang all the pieces, it will be every spare wall. And we had this discussion. And I think we came to a compromise, but does the community get to make that decision, or does the library get to make that decision? And if the community decides to hang every single piece of art on the walls, can the library ever change it?
Yes. It's your question. But I think, I guess, I'm seeing this, I think that the basic framework to me feels right that you're suggesting. And then there's some language that says the interior is managed by, the interior is managed by the library, and then maybe some nod to architectural features that are being modified require consultation with the affected jurisdiction or something.
Because I would say there's a system-wide interest in your interior of your building.
Right.
Because you need to operate, you and your staff need to operate a well-functioning branch that I assume fits in with the rest of the system. And you probably have ways and means of operating and things that you know are the best way to engage with people and have them invest in the content in the building that you would want to have some control over. And so I care about that. So even though you're doing Capitola, I want Capitola to function well for the library, so it benefits the whole system.
Also want to say that when I say the library, I mean the JPA. So Jamie, let's say we disagreed about the artwork. You still have a forum in which you have a great deal of power to come and say, I do not like the judgment that this administration is making around the interiors of my local library. It's not that the library has the authority, it just is bringing it back to the JPA sometimes to be the mediator on some of these local issues. So I don't want to say that the library has all authority and that the city has none on the interior operations. The local jurisdiction has tremendous authority, but they're bringing it here to have the discussion. And as a library director, I would fight those battles rarely. Because it's not in my best interest to fight with the community or to fight with the jurisdiction. But I still think the library needs to be able to have a tenant relationship where they can operate the inside of their building. I also need to acknowledge to the audience that there has been conflict in the past around the library's perspective. And I think that we're dealing with some trust issues still. We have a ways to go. And so I acknowledge that people may not be ready to say yes to all of this, but I think if we don't do it now, when we don't have a big issue, we are going to have conflict. Okay.
I like the basics as well, but I do think that it's difficult for us when we've got a library under design, our library is nothing. And so it's hard to know, and we're moving into this era of a new century of library services. It's really hard. So we might have to have basic language, and then we might have to be more specific once they're constructed. And we itemize and we're very clear about exactly how this branch is going to be. If there's something strange that is in that gray area, is it a fixture? Is it an operational feature inside? So we might have to go there, ideally not, but we might have to. Just kind of see how it plays out.
I like that.
Yeah.
And I'll offer up a suggestion. I mean, there are other models we can look at. The Animal Services Authority, we have the shelter, we have the JPA with the jurisdictions, and we have a requirement as a part of the lease to do a capital maintenance plan that the authority, the JPA, has to manage. So initially, the county made a large investment into the building and included furniture and fixtures. And then as a part of the replacement plan, that came under the authority, and they have to set aside funds every year. So there are funds there to replace the chairs and replace the tables and fix the roof and do those kinds of improvements. And that may be something we want to consider as a part of the lease on these new facilities, so that money's set aside and then can be there for you to replace those things.
And I think ultimately a very big question is who's going to maintain what. And so we have a whole page of, here there's a suggestion that the jurisdictions do that sort of the exterior, the infrastructure, and that the library do everything else and utilities and things. That isn't what's happening, but I would say what's happening is that the buildings are maintained. So I think I will spend some time looking at what Christina suggested about this language around a long-term maintenance plan. That may be the simplest thing to do. I would also say, though, that there's differences in what jurisdictions take care of and what don't. And right now, Capitola and Scotts Valley are doing a lot more maintenance than the county or the city, which that sort of maintenance is coming out of the operating budget. So we do have to come up with some sort of consistency. And I think it probably requires a major thought process in terms of the operating budget in the next few years. Amy has done some research about this model of local jurisdictions owning the building. Does exist out there. This isn't unique. It was true in Minnesota, it's true in California. So she looked at some of the leases, but usually what we're seeing in this model is that the local jurisdiction acts like a landlord and takes care of the shell, which is not really where we're at. And then I think the liability issues we probably need to talk about.
On the infrastructure, so I think that probably it'd be best to have the operator sort of responsible for the water, sewer, gas, electrical.
Meaning the library. The
library, yeah. To the site, because right now I think the way it reads is sort of like, once it's in the building, it's the library, and then if it's outside the building, it's the city. And I'm imagining like a water leak, and it's like suddenly you're calling me, and we don't know where the water leak is. Is it under the building? Is it outside the building? And it's more like, it would seem probably cleaner to just say the infrastructure to the site, it's your PG&E bill, it's your sewer bill. Well, the sewer bill is another issue because that shows up on the assessment that we have to pay, but that seems a little bit cleaner, just in terms of clarity, rather than picking up the phone and saying, hey, we don't have power, Jamie, can you fix it? But maybe that's the only case where, well, I don't know, but that's one case where the lease extends beyond the footprint of the building.
Yeah. Any other things you want to talk about today? Do you want the library to do all the maintenance of the facility?
Inside and out, everything.
So is that the way it works in Lime Oak right now, basically? I'm trying to think of the different models that we
Yes.
have.
Well, there's an argument to be made about having the library do it, because if I'm doing it Santa Cruz City Way, and you're doing it the Capitol City Way and Scotts Valley Way, are we gonna have consistency across the system again? So I think that could be an argument for centralizing, I mean, having to think about how that's going to be funded.
I think there's operational impacts for each jurisdiction that's unique. For instance, we respond to a number of maintenance requests from the library. I have literally a skeleton crew for maintenance, 4 or 5 people tops. Once I pull someone off of there, the whole day is just completely gone. So we're so thin that it's a significant operational impact for us. So things like plumbing, gas, electrical, to shift that down to the library would be so beneficial to us from an operational standpoint, because we don't have the bandwidth. And again, that's a uniqueness of Scotts Valley just because of our resources. So I would agree with that. I don't think that they should do all of it, but there are unique things that I think that need to
Would be
fall.
simpler.
Yeah.
The one, I think in general it makes sense. I think the one exception would be, things like the tot lot in Capitol, which frankly, I'm speaking against my own interest, but if we were to say the library is responsible for the maintenance on the ground of the building, if I were sitting in one of those other chairs, I'd say, wait a second, Jamie, so the library is responsible for taking care of a city playground? That doesn't seem exactly right.
Yeah.
And so I think in Felton, there also may be a similar situation where there's going to be some exterior gardens or something along those lines. And, we may just need to think about that. Like, where's the bounds of the city's, the library's sort of whole property maintenance? And if the property happens to be a 5-acre demonstration forest, I don't think the library should be dealing with that. So being judicious about what we define as the property, I think, is appropriate, and making sure that it includes the normal library stuff like parking lots, landscaping, library buildings, but not, exterior parks or recreational amenities that are, the jurisdiction has choose to co-locate.
So can I ask the extreme question, because I wasn't here? Why doesn't the library own the building?
Why doesn't?
I actually don't know the answer to that question.
Well,
Can a JPA own buildings?
sure. So the library doesn't own the building just because of the history, because each one of the libraries has sort of a separate story and came from a separate time and a separate place. And
That's what the RDA issue. They're purchased with different funds that have different restrictions.
yeah,
Maybe at the end of the life of the RDA, there might be a discussion, but.
right. And, the notion of how do you ever break up if you share the house. I think that was always in the back of every jurisdiction's mind, is someday we may want to divorce, yeah. So I think that's why. Because I know that this branch was built by the city of Santa Cruz way back in the day, and it's like this was the Santa Cruz's main library. This was very much your library, and you said, hey, we'll provide library services outside of the city of Santa Cruz, great, but we're not going to turn over title to this.
Well, there may be too. I mean, I have to think about this, but I don't know if any of those assets in those jurisdictions are pledged against any other debt. So it's pretty complicated to move some of that around.
And the reason I ask is, it does definitely create really different relationships. In some ways, I've really been frustrated with it because it's really time consuming and I'm working with so many jurisdictions. In some ways, I've actually liked it because I think the level of local engagement is actually good for the library, because there's a lot of really grassroots ownership. And so when people here say my library, they mean it in a way that I haven't quite experienced, that I think in the long term helps the library. But traditionally, I have to ask the question is, if it really comes down to the library maintains it all, then what is the purpose of the local ownership? Is the question that I will ultimately ask you. If our job is for the next 30 years to maintain it, why do we have 4 owners? And I get complications, but.
Well, you are receiving the use of the asset for $1 a year. And, I mean, that's something to think about.
But I would say the library is a public organization to serve the public good as well.
Sure. But if the jurisdictions put resources, county resources, general fund resources, redevelopment resources beyond the bonds which are currently happening into those original facilities, you know, that's their investment.
I don't think the city would be comfortable with transferring.
I'm not asking it. I'm just going to push you on a little bit on the, then maybe keep a stake in it and maintain it. The one thing I'd hate to see is that we don't maintain it for the next 30 years. We've done that and it didn't work. And it was bad for the libraries and it was bad for the public. So we've got to come up with a way to maintain these into vibrant community spaces. And so that, and just pushing your boundaries, but I think it's important that we have these conversations.
I agree. I think that if the decision is to move the maintenance to the library, I think we have to look at the budget and be very real about what our commitments from all of our jurisdictions will be to support that function. If we agree it's in the best interest of the system, our branches, et cetera, our communities, then we need to have a funding mechanism to support that.
We'll keep talking.
Yeah, big questions. Okay.
You thought it was going to be a short meeting.
Well, so Susan, I'm wondering about next steps. So I know that this term sheet is great, and you've raised a lot of thought-provoking questions. There's been some discussion, some sense of maybe things to explore or things that might be palatable. And so where does this go from here? There is that subcommittee on which I went for the city of Santa Cruz and Cole Coburn went from the county, and I think we had Steve from, and
do you want someone from Scottsdale?
Yeah.
Who'd you like?
Well, it can't be me, so I'll need to think about that to let you know.
And one thing that we're going to do in that group is go back to our own cities and look at our rental use agreements, just to say like how we manage our own public spaces already. So you want to use the Civic Auditorium or the Loudon Nelson Center here in Santa Cruz, what are our rules around that, and kind of bring that together to start engaging on that question.
I also really want to go look at the Animal Services Authority's capital maintenance plan, because I think that is the kind of direction we probably need to go.
I think once this gets a little bit more shape, though, there needs to be a juncture where we go back to our respective jurisdictions, because I have a feeling, at least in my world, that there might be a difference of opinion from the city manager and some of the council members. So
I also think that all the attorneys are going to have to go.
Oh, yeah.
So let's just call it in process, and we'll have the subcommittee meet again.
And is there any particular timeline you're working under to get this done?
It's probably longer than I want to say out loud, so.
No one else could.
Let's put it this way, my library is going to open 2 years from now.
That's really good. I wasn't going to say out loud. I would like, before we move into any of the Measure S projects, for this to be agreed to.
Any of them, even the small renovations?
Even the small renovations.
Okay.
We'll need to chat about that.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, so that was the discussion. Now I want to open it up for members of the public. If anyone wishes to comment on jurisdiction leases that we just discussed. I'm not seeing any public comment. All right, so there's no action on this item, just a review. So then nothing for the board to do. So then we will move on to item 11C. This is reviewing the Friends of the Santa Cruz Public Libraries MOU, also not an action item, seems like a discussion item.
And this is, our practice has been to introduce concepts before we approve them. memorandum of understanding between the library and the Friends is a pretty standard thing in library world. The American Library Association has a framework from which to do this. And this is the first time you've seen this, so again, I'm not looking for any approvals. But ultimately, I believe because we have this sort of complicated approach to local jurisdiction Friends, a main Friends group, the library itself and the JPA, I would love to see the JPA and the library sign off on a memorandum of understanding. I think what we're trying to get to is our expectations of what we expect of the Friends and what we're willing to give to the Friends in order to make them our official fundraising group. And, you know, they are using our reputation to raise money. So it really is more of an expectation document. In exchange, the Friends need some things to be successful. These are a lot of things we've taken from the American Library Association website. I know that there are some things in flux, so I don't want to spend too much time today, but ultimately we need to have this document to say, yes, you're our official fundraising group. Anyone had time to read it? What was your reaction?
I think there's a lot in here. And I would want to make sure that we have this run by the attorneys before, you know, before we come final document, because, you know, an MOU at the end of the day, signed like this is a contract. So, you know, make sure that there's enough clarity in here that we're not legally tying our hands in some way that binds us. Something we don't want to do.
Just there's certain things like I would love to have in writing that we can surplus our equipment and books to the Friends. Right now they sell our surplus books, and that's a practice, but it's the kind of thing that I think technically we need to say we don't follow other government surplusing. I'll say that as we move out of buildings and have them renovated, one of the things we did in my last library system is surplus all the excess equipment in the building to the Friends, and then they did a huge moving sale, and it was a great event for them to center some fundraising around that also gave them some sort of basic funds to do fundraising with. So I'd love to get that surplusing piece in particularly through. It does allow me to provide them space. Technically,
So these things here are in pretty much in alignment with how things operate now. Are there any changes, major changes?
So one of the things that the library has done is just accepted gifts directly to the library. And I really want to, you know, there's a long relationship here, and I think we need to develop a new and healthy Friends group. I think the library cannot compete with the Friends, and that the Friends need to be the source of fundraising. But this hasn't worked perfectly, and there's some conflict still out there. I would love to see one 501c3 rather than 10, and we're working our way through some of these issues. I know, again, we've got that Scotts Valley's been through it, Capitola's going through it right now. We have a lot of work to do.
And is part of your process going to share this with the Friends group, or have they already seen it?
They have seen it. And so we can also have some further conversation on this, but I want to introduce the concept. And it is interesting, but the lease and this and the gift policy and the naming policy do have this interaction. sort of scope of work and responsibility.
To the extent that we're sort of putting down paper what our practice has been, I think that that's probably wise and establishes the expectations. I think there's potentially a little bit of clarity that you can work on regarding space. Sort of will provide space, may provide space if available, maybe just being a little bit more explicit, so the expectations again are really clear. And then, before it comes back as a contract, make sure we get legal review on it. That would be my suggestions.
Thank you.
Okay, any more questions or comments from the board? Members of the public, anyone wish to comment on the Friends draft MOU? Seeing none, I will close public comment, and then again, not an action item, so we'll come back at some point. So then we'll move on to the next item in general business, item 11D, options for use of Santa Cruz Public Library's fund balance.
So we maintain a rather large fund balance. I know, and we have our 15% reserve fully funded. Sorry, I'm just getting Marcus's new June report, and I got it 2 minutes before the meeting started. So we have $2 million in the 15% reserve. And we have $2.8 million in our ending fund balance on June 17th. So this is not the year-end fund balance yet. I think the issue that's coming up is that the Measure S projects are short of funds. Construction costs have escalated pretty significantly since we did the facilities master plan 3 years ago. It's amazing what's going on. And so several members have requested a discussion about whether we could use a portion of the fund balance either to offset some construction costs or enhance projects through things like energy retrofits. We still would have to create a sort of a specificity to that concept, and we would have to create an allocation methodology, but we could use the allocation percentages that we did in Measure S as a simple solution. And I'm curious if people are interested in that. I know in particular, Capitola is coming in more expensive than we anticipated. I know for sure that downtown is going to. Felton seems to be well on track, but based on the timing of Aptos, I really think Aptos is going to have some financial concerns.
So this item is on the agenda based on my request at our last meeting. And it really is, I requested it kind of because of the funding issues we're having in Capitola. Succinctly, we have a $2.5 million gap between the amount of Measure S and RDA committed funds to the project and the cost estimate, and that actually was after scaling the project back from the original project that was envisioned in the Teresa's master plan that was done 5 years ago. Capitola has closed that down to a $1.5 million gap, but Friends are actively engaged in fundraising. So we contributed, set aside $1 million of general fund dollars to help out. So originally my thought was to try to find a way to maybe use this fund balance to help offset some of that gap. Doing it in a fair way, doing it in a way that wasn't unique to Capitola, but was something that was replicatable for 10 branches. The most logical thing as we started to look at the project budget was to put in PV photovoltaics on the project. It seemed like a really logical way. Turned out we didn't have that in the project budget. So by having the library say, okay, yes, we'll use our one-time revenue to put in PV on the building, turns out I don't actually help close my gap. But that said, it makes the project better and it reduces the long-term cost to the library. So we are reaching a junction point at the capital design process where it would be cheaper for us to decide, yes, PD is part of the project, and then as part of the bid package and the design documents, include the brackets and the this and the that and the bid for the solar. It could be done later, but it would be better to decide now-ish that, yes, PD is part of the project. Conservatively, it's $130,000, $140,000 ad. So my thinking is that if we just say as a board that we have this fund balance, we have 10 branches, my guess is capital is probably in about the median position. So if you multiply that $140,000 estimate times 10, it'd be a $1.4 million spend for the library one time. It's an investment that also has a long-term payout because it reduces the library's cost obligations for maintenance. For some of the branches, it doesn't make sense to PV them, or it maybe make more sense to do energy retrofits, or it may make sense to do it in 5 years when the roof needs replacement. I don't know the specifics on each one. Maine will be more expensive. Maine is going to be 3 times what Capitola would be, but then I assume that La Selva or Garfield Park would be half the cost. So that's kind of my pitch. I think it helps the projects be better projects. I think it helps invest in taking one-time revenue and invest in the long term for the library. And it's at least a decision in Capitola that we need to give our architects and designers direction relatively soon that yes, we want this as part of the project. And I don't know that I need final sort of thumbs up from this board, but an indication that that may be possible. Because I'm growing my deficit by adding that into the project. That's my pitch.
I would say that the public has expressed high interest in solar in particular. And Tiffany has done some pre-design work in the city for Garfield and Brantford. Betsy said there is an interest in the county, and I'm sorry, I don't know about Scotts Valley.
There would be interest in discussing.
When is your due date in terms of drop dead on that?
The sooner the better. I mean, I think that if we gave direction, do we have a September meeting?
We do.
I think September works.
Could we spend the next month just posing this question of what solar would cost for each of the projects? And a really rough and dirty, and then looking at an analysis of sort of percent share, and bring that back to you just for, would that help you?
And cost savings.
So this fund balance has been generated over time, just through savings in staff costs, whatever. So the savings is really owned by the entire JPA, and all of our contributions went into that fund balance, right? There wasn't some money that came for some reason. Okay. So the suggestion is to take kind of this group asset, divide it up in some way that seems appropriate to this board, invest in this asset, and then have the savings accrue to the libraries, again, who are paying the electricity bills and running the inside. And then we also help advance our climate action goals, which we all have, and the county certainly has. So yeah, I think that'd be interesting to look at. But I did have a question. So last time I think I substituted for Martine, it's when the budget discussions were just starting, and there was this discussion about increasing hours. And I thought the hour increases were being funded out of the fund balance, and that it was already looking at over time that would be drawing down that fund balance to a point where some decisions or some new revenues or something would have to come into play. Do I understand that correctly? So is this oversubscribed already? Have we already committed our fund balance for other reasons or its use over time?
Tina, I believe the question is important. Mm-hmm. I think that there was a description of how we might fund ours in the future, and one of the approaches was to look at the fund balance. I would say that based upon the fund balance and being available, the fund balance is now higher than it was So it's
Okay.
still going up in spite of the expenditures that we're making. Now, we just implemented the staff expenditures. It's $400,000 a year, 5 FTE on June 1st. So we can't fully see the consequences, but at one point we talked about literally the fund balance could cover 5 years of that. But I still feel like our revenue against expenditures, our revenues are exceeding expenditures.
Okay. And I really think Martine should be making this decision and we'll be back next meeting. So, and he knows the history as well for this. So if it can't wait till September, I think it'd be better.
In my pitch, to be clear, is really that we don't get into the Measure S percentages.
Okay.
For this situation, I feel like the cost for the PV at each facility should reflect what the value is at that facility in terms of, you know, the energy load and the savings and everything else. And so, like, for example, Scotts Valley got 4.5% of Measure S. I don't think it would be right that presumably Capitol and Scotts Valley are going to have about the same energy load.
Right.
That in Scotts Valley's case, you guys would get 33% or something of your solar system paid, but Capitol gets 100%. That doesn't seem right. So it seems to me that the proposal I'm making is that we
fund solar
fund
across all
solar
the
across the
systems.
board as appropriate at each facility, you know, based on the right, you know, it may be that some of the smaller branches, it's not quite warranted. But that would be based on, you know, the engineer's estimates and best available information.
Yeah, I think looking at the cost benefit analysis is going to be important to support or substantiate what you're saying.
And I don't know if I can get that fully completed, because my approach was going to go to ask the jurisdiction what they thought it would cost. But if we really wanted an assessment, I mean, I think that's having an individual come out and do a consistent assessment. Do you want to go that far?
I think you can get that done for free from solar installers. Give them access to your PG&E records, and I mean, I get something in the mail unsolicited for that sort of thing. So that may not be the quality in which we would make our final decision, but it
may give us some consistency. I know the work's been done in the city and Capitola. I don't know, but I don't know they've used a consistent methodology. And I don't know what's going on in the city of Scottsville, or the county of Scottsville.
Yeah, we're working on some solar projects. I don't know if we've looked at the library sites as a part of that overall project. But
We'll
we
see what we
have
can
worked
get.
with a vendor that did do all the analysis for us. I think, I mean, I did talk to Carlos about this, and I agree with Tina. I think this should wait because he needs to make the decision. You know, I think he's cautious about, you know, using all of the fund balance. I think using a portion of it after we've seen what the cost benefit analysis is, you know, maybe warranted. But I think he's also interested in looking at the Measure S formula for distribution of those funds.
I'd also say I think there's a larger question here too. I mean, the scope of this discussion was narrowed to PV. What about just shortfalls overall in our projects? Right. So you've identified you want to add this on as part of your shortfall, but because you're the first in line. But what if, you know, Felton comes on board and there's something else? Right. Then so do we want to have
a disbursement of cash versus
generally, as opposed to no, it's going to be around this specific just PV panels on our roofs?
Well, the pitch is that it isn't just the disbursement of cash, and the more I thought about it, the more as a library board member wearing that hat, I felt like we needed to be investing in our long-term operating costs with this money to the extent. And so if this pivoted to, you know, Capitola, we say we have excess fund balance of, you know, 1.4 million, and Capitola gets 12.5% of that, I start to feel like that's not a real investment in the operations of this board. So I at this point, I am really pushing that. Obviously, the rest of the board could take it a different direction, but
I think there could be corollaries maybe inside systems and other things that would also invest in the long term. So I just think it's maybe part of your board's discussion when you next meet is it want to be limited there?
I think that's a good point because that might not be, while we might be interested, that might not be our priority. And also the cost savings on our branch may be significantly different than maybe your branch or whoever, right? And so I would be willing as a board member to invest that in the appropriate facility if we're going to get a better bang for the buck than ours. But I also want the flexibility to do something with funding that is more appropriate, but then the long-term benefits everybody.
Okay. Do we have anything more to say on this item right now? I think we've pretty much exhausted that. Susan, anything else? Okay. All right, so I think the agreement there, no action today, some work to be done in between. So at the September meeting, we'll make sure the principals are here. And this decision can be made. Okay, and I'll ask for any public comments on this item. I'm not seeing any. Okay, so that closes out item 11D then. And that's the remainder of our general business. So I'll just make an announcement that the next upcoming meeting is September 7th, 2017 at the Scotts Valley Branch Library. That will commence at 6 p.m. And I will say this meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you.